Today on the PIO podcast, we'd like to welcome PR expert Molly McPherson. Molly, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Happy to be here.
Molly, thank you for being on. I happen to notice that you are author of the book Indestructible: Reclaim Control and Respond in Confidence in a Media Crisis. There have been a lot of media crises going on right now with a lot of very high profile people. As a media person that handles the crisis end of it, how, from a public information officer's perspective, do they handle those crises? Because we're going to get them. I mean, I've had them in the multiple agencies I've worked in, but I'd like to hear it from your perspective because you're the expert.
Well, I mean, coming from a background being a PIO, even though there are a lot of big crises that are happening out there, and I think for the average PIO, public information officer, public affairs officer, they don't think they're ever going to experience a crisis. But everyone is always monitoring their reputation, and every reputation is at stake every single day, particularly because of social media. It's just a matter of what the algorithm wants to focus on and what the news happens to focus on. So don't assume that if you're tucked away safe in some agency, either a state or a federal agency, that it's not going to happen to you. Yes, definitely. Nowadays, there's crises in almost every single sector.
Absolutely. And your husband was in the Coast Guard. I have a son that's in the Coast Guard, and then I happen to notice that you kind of cut your teeth as a FEMA public affairs specialist. And
yeah, so I have to correct the record, though. It is a former husband who is in the Coast Guard, but my current daughter, and only, she's not my only daughter. I have 3 daughters, but my daughter just graduated from the Coast Guard Academy and she served. So it's interesting, having been a trailing spouse for 20 years. I was, so familiar with the Coast Guard, just I felt like I was serving in the Coast Guard, if you will. But to go back now and experience it through the academy, I was on the board, the parents board there, and now as she serves. So we talk about the Coast Guard as well.
Yeah, my son's stationed out in San Diego. Absolutely loves it. Yeah, he just loves it out there.
Well, I have to ask, what is he? Is he stationed on a boat?
He is actually in a special drug unit. He's in a TACLET unit, so they do. He's all over the Caribbean, and depends. He's on a Dutch boat, U.S. Navy boat, a Coast Guard boat. He's all over the place.
Wow! So officer or enlisted?
He's an enlisted. He's a petty officer.
Petty officer. Does he like it?
Yeah. He loves it.
I bet he does. I bet that sounds fun.
Yeah. So Molly, I want to talk about one of the things that really the reason I wanted to talk to you is I caught you're doing all your talks on social media, on TikTok particularly. You are known as a PR lady on there. You're always giving a review of something that happened, whether it's, I saw you do the thing about Jay-Z yesterday. I see you talked about the CEO the other day. There's a lot of going on. You talk about these, and I love the way you do them on there. What's the benefit for covering those?
Well, thank you so much. As a matter of fact, I just, had a call this morning. I'm a Forbes contributor, and we had a call talking about, how to use social media, and they had me highlight, TikTok as one of the ways to, promote, your, information. In our case, is our articles. And what I said about the medium is, most people might dismiss it as just a young person's medium where everyone just talks about whatever's trending or, get ready with me. But I find it to be the most powerful social media network out there, simply because the algorithm drives so much of that information. That's what intrigues me about it. So I don't use social media as a typical user. I like to find trending stories, news stories, breaking news stories that everyone's talking about and that the algorithm is following, and then pull out the media crisis or public relations lesson.
I really like the way you do it. Every time I follow you all the time. I love seeing the things that you're doing. And I've learned quite a bit since I've started following you. So I do appreciate it. Social media is one of the things that PIOs and a lot of agencies struggle with sometimes, because they just want to push content out there and they're not giving any thought to how their audience is going to, absorb it. So how can they use a platform to make sure they're effectively communicating?
Yeah, it certainly depends. It certainly depends on the platform. That can be used in many cases in the federal area. You can't even use TikTok. They're not even allowed to use it. So there's only so many channels at their disposal. But I think the trick to using it is understanding who the end user is. Like when most people think about the Department of Homeland Security, they don't think about it as an agency, but then they think about TSA. And people have experiences with TSA, and they're usually negative because you're
Mhm.
always stressed about what you can pack, what you can't pack, and you have to go through. Sometimes you have to go back. I mean, it's stressful. Yet on social media, their posts are quirky, they're funny. They know how to insert themselves into conversation. It's adding that personality that I think really can set out, a person or a user. So even if it's an agency, which is really like a faceless type of entity, it's more of an institution, you can still have a personality. So for PIOs, especially the ones who are managing the social media networks, just see how you can bring personality, into the channel in good times. And then when a crisis happens, well, then it's absolutely going to be a go-to for information.
Okay. Molly, what in your background, in your experience, what are some of the common mistakes that PIOs or public affairs people make in handling a crisis on social media?
I don't like dunking on PIOs, honestly, because I think PIOs, they really know what they're doing. They're the ones who are working out there, they're hustling out there, speaking to reporters, they're writing. I find the mistakes don't come from the PIOs. It comes from leadership. It comes from decisions made by leadership that are being told being told to comms staff to tell them what to do. I think the comms people, the PIOs, they know the real deal. They know what's going on. They know what needs to be done. But leadership tends to be risk averse when it comes to media nowadays.
Hmm.
Now that social media is there because people don't have control of their reputation with social media. So I think that's the challenge.
Okay. So, Molly, you have the Indestructible PR Response Network. How can PIOs leverage that to effectively manage a communications crisis?
Well, the framework was something I created when I was a PIO. When I was at FEMA, I was at an agency at a time when it was a struggle to get any press. I had reporters laugh at me because we were coming out of Hurricane Katrina, which was almost a reputation killer for the agency. And my job was to promote individual assistance and to promote all the good things that FEMA was doing. So it was definitely a challenge. But the idea behind it is this is whenever I spoke to a reporter and I got to the truth of the matter, to say, I didn't needed to defend FEMA. I didn't need to defend what they did, good or bad, but just tell the story. Like, you know what? It wasn't just FEMA. There were a lot of other people during Hurricane Katrina that made a lot of mistakes. And then I would highlight the good things that FEMA did. I would explain it and then talk about what they learned and what we're doing moving forward. So, in general, it's own it, explain it, promise it. That's the framework. And it is rooted in accountability. And so, when people can just acknowledge that there was a gap or something fell short, or you know what, if we could go back, we would have done it differently. It does a lot to not only diffuse negative sentiment online, but also can diffuse a reporter from doing a certain story if they don't think a story's there.
Okay. So, in regards to building positive reputation out of, using social media to do that, what do you think is a good practice for the PIO to utilize?
I mean, a good practice or a good
Yeah.
tool?
Well, a good tool.
Okay.
Yeah, a good tool.
Something that I say to all communicators because of social media, I have an audience that's filled with communicators in the private and in the public sector. I think the biggest challenge for them is not the skills itself, because again, I think comms people, they know their stuff. I mean, we've been doing it for a long time. The big challenge is communicating with leadership. How do you instill trust in your department, your work, or the idea of communications so leadership feels comfortable being more transparent and more accountable in times of crisis or when they're dealing with any type of management? So the real skill is how do you build trust with management? And if they know how to do that, that's, I think, will make them successful.
Excellent. So, your Patreon community, PR and communication sessions, what key principles should PIOs keep in mind when they're interacting with journalists and the media?
Well, my Patreon is really an offshoot of my TikTok. In the beginning, I wanted it to be a collection, like a community of like minded kind of PR comms people. And it certainly was filled with some of those people, but it was filled with a lot of other people who I find just love communication. They love PR. They love PR crisis. Sometimes we think we're the only ones who know or care about the industry, but not so. There's a lot of people out there. So for me, it's interesting to get feedback from people who don't even work in the field of comms, and I think that's incredibly valuable. Sometimes, we can be in our own little vacuums and we only talk to people in our world, and all our good friends are people in our office. They're all comms people. But my goodness, bring in a non-comms person to a comms conversation and you can learn a lot.
Absolutely. Is in your background, in the recent background, do you recall a time where a PIO handled a crisis really well, and what your thoughts were on it?
It's unfortunate because when you're at the PIO level, and it doesn't matter if you're a GS9 or a GS, 14, you're not given the agency to run many things. It's, usually it's someone, could be a political appointee, or it's someone
Chief of
just
staff or something like
managing, or
that.
a chief of
Yeah.
staff. Exactly. But I think a valuable tool to have, or expertise to have, is to understand culture. It's to understand how culture works on social media, on digital media. Be the person who translates what people are saying. That's a very, very quick way to gain internal trust within the system. People who are high up the ladder, they need help decoding what's really happening. One of the biggest mistakes I see, and this is what happened with United Health Group, with the CEO discussing the tragic slaying of the CEO, Brian Thompson. He was on an internal Zoom call addressing his staff about what happened to Brian Thompson. And there were two things that I'm sure, wasn't expecting. One is that the video was leaked. And in that video, he was discussing how everyone needed to dismiss all the negative commentary about United. And that, to me, is the fatal flaw of any
Mhm.
leadership out there, is when they dismiss the criticism.
That is one of the things that I see so often is they think that they can just ignore it and hope it goes away, and a lot of times that just festers and grows, right?
Yeah, and not just that. It's not only ignoring it, but it's dismissing it and also looking down at it. They just, in the case of the healthcare CEO, the health group CEO, he said it was just noise. It was just meaningless noise, but it's not. Buried underneath the snarky memes, the cruel comments about a death of a CEO, there's a lot of valuable feedback and insight about the healthcare industry and the processes within United Healthcare. There's a lot of learning that can be found in criticism.
Okay. Let me ask you this about the United Airlines stuff. All the crisis that United Airlines has had over the years. They were on the news last night and they were talking about the continued problems that they have. Why do you think that they're still having an issue, reinforcing to the commute to the public that they're taking the appropriate steps to make sure the planes are safe and they're not going to be at risk for crashing?
Yeah, there are two areas there that I think impact a reputation, in particular when you are looking at a large company like United. First, it's just the sector. The travel sector attracts a lot of interest. A lot of people travel. So it attracts a lot of news stories, if there's a storm or there's delays. And then when there is a big storm, we're looking for the stories within that, like when Southwest Airlines had a complete meltdown over the holidays. Oh, speaking of, here's my ensign calling me right now. That was a big story that stuck with Southwest. Same thing with United Airlines, with the CEO dismissing a passenger, Dr. Dow, who was, dragged down the aisle of the airline. People have long memories. Crises have a way of leaving a mark, if you will. That's the stuff that doesn't wipe away. The details of a crisis fade, but not the bad decisions. So for United Airlines, there's a lot of people who still remember the CEO's response. Oscar Munoz, I believe, is the CEO,
Mhm.
his dismissal of that passenger. That's what people remember. So when negative things happen to like a United, then, oh, this is the broken airline. This is the mismanaged airline. And it tends to pile on. Reputation, public opinion is so fluid. So that's why it's so important to get the response correct the first time.
Thank you, Molly. Hey, in your book, your Indestructible PR Crisis Playbook, it was designed to help people turn social media a crisis into an opportunity. How do PIOs reframe a crisis into a chance to build trust and strengthen relationships?
Yeah, the PIO, depending on where they're working, I mean, it's assumed that they do have connection to their stakeholders, ultimately who their stakeholders are. And in some cases, they can actually go out in the field and meet them. In my case, when I was at FEMA, I got to travel to disasters, before storms hit and after the storms hit. So I got to see the stakeholder face to face. I got to hear the good things about FEMA. I got to hear the not so good things about FEMA. PIOs connecting with their stakeholders anywhere they can will always be helpful. It will form the thinking around any type of communication campaign. PIOs struggle with that hierarchy and where they feel that they don't have a lot of agency within their agency. They just show up to do a job. But the more that you can connect with stakeholders, understand what their pain points are, but also understand why they love you, and then try to weave that into your communication as much as possible. That's effective communications for this day and age.
Molly, when you worked for FEMA, one of the things that I read that you did is you pushed to go out to the scenes and interview people and tell the story of FEMA staff out on the ground. I think that storytelling is something that PIOs need to do more of, and they need to connect. That's your way to connect. That's in my opinion, and that was a great way for you to do it.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you even bring it up because really, the reason why is because I hated sitting in an office all day. I hated sitting in C Street, sitting on C Street in a building. I wanted to go out. I mean, my gosh, if you work for FEMA, you don't want to sit in a cubicle. You want to go out where the action is. And I was able to advocate for that. I said, you know what? Social media is coming. We have Twitter. Digital is a thing now. I think we can repair a lot of our reputation if we just go out in the field and film our stakeholders. And it just so happened that I advocated that I would be the person who would do that. And it worked. I had a great boss in Marty Bahamonde who said, sure, go ahead, put on a backpack. And I was a backpack journalist before they exist. And I got to meet the stakeholder face to face, and it transformed my career.
Outstanding. All right, Molly, let's change this up. I got to ask you some quick rapid fire questions. All right,
Okay.
texting or talking,
Ooh, talking.
movies or books,
Audiobooks.
coffee, tea, or energy drink,
Definitely a latte with no sugar in the morning.
adult drink of choice.
I thought you said adultery.
No, adult. No. Adult drink of choice.
Ooh, I would say
That could have been a PR crisis.
yeah. I would say a Moscow Mule.
If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Well, I possess a superpower, which is I have the ability to get anyone to tell me anything. But if I could be a superhero, I would love to be invisible.
Nice. Ask permission or beg for forgiveness.
Ooh, beg for forgiveness.
What place do you most want to travel to?
So many places, but right now, someplace that's warm.
Yeah, I agree with you. What's your favorite way to relax after a long day?
Ooh, I love going on walks or a run.
Nice. If you could choose to have coffee with any living or deceased historical figure, who would it be?
John Lennon.
Interesting. Final thoughts, Ali. What key points would you like our listeners to take from today's interview?
If there's a key point, one, definitely follow me on TikTok or read my articles on Forbes and reach out to me, join the community. Because I love the community. I love being able to talk to people who are all like-minded people. That's the best thing. But I guess, piece of advice that I think really resonates is one that speaks to a pain point. And I think a lot of communicators out there, a lot of PIOs out there don't think they are of value or they're not heard. Definitely speak up. Tell people what your skill set is, your talent, and just listen. And social listening counts as well.
I agree. Do you have a motto or a piece of wisdom that you live by?
Well, I mean, I have an ethos when it comes to communication, and my communication ethos with my clients is very similar to my ethos in.
Molly, I lost your mic.
I hit mute. I'm sorry. Will you edit that out? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I can edit that out. Could you just re-say it?
Yeah. So it was the question.
Yeah, so the question is there a piece of wisdom or a motto that you live by?
I live by a motto that was given to me by my grandmother. She said two things to me growing up. One was, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we begin to deceive," which is all about why you shouldn't lie. But also, she would utter a phrase. It was from a poem by Edwin Markham. And to paraphrase, it's all about how we all have our journeys in life, and everything that we put into others' lives comes back into our own. And I think that applies from a human aspect, but also from a communication crisis aspect as well. If you show accountability, transparency, if you're looking out for your stakeholders, it will come back in a form of trust.
Awesome. Molly, what are your thoughts about TikTok and potentially going bye-bye?
Well, certainly I don't like it. I mean, I love the app, not just as a user, as a content creator, but I love it because I learn so much. I really find it to be more informative than going to a search engine. I think it's misplaced where people are worried, that there's some, tie to China. It's really, really unfortunate because I think the app helps a lot of people. But certainly, if it does go away, there's always going to be another app or perhaps a US buyer. But that type of technology and algorithm, movie, kind of video mixed with content and information is powerful. So it will still be around in some form.
Yeah, I'm sure YouTube or Instagram, one of the two, or a new one will pop up somewhere. Molly, best place to reach out to connect with you is by one of your socials, whether it's TikTok or, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on my website, mollymcpherson.com, or any of my social medias. I have everything on all my social media, link in bio.
And I will add all that in the show notes. Molly, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Robert. Appreciate it.